in this complex world, the traditional approach of content management is no longer a good fit. And I want to just spend one quick slide for context to explain how CMS architecture traditionally used to work. There's a CMS, or digital experience platform backend, that is there to manage the digital experience. This is where content is created and orchestrated, where the peer review happens, and all the kind of low-level stuff that needs to happen in a CMS. And the second component is the front end. It's also called head or delivery tier. And both of these components come typically from the same vendor. So you see that these are in this dotted box. So they are kind of decoupled. They live physically on different servers, but they are essentially the same product. And the front end that is there to deliver the digital experiences to the end user is baked in. It's intertwined with the back end. And it's really hard to make changes in one of these components without having to change the others. And these are the big disadvantages or risks that come with this traditional architecture. It is a monolithic design where everything is baked in and intertwined. Content, design, and experiences are very hard to separate. And at its core, this is a solution that is really designed only for one purpose, and that is to run a website. And it can be good at that. But as soon as those requirements change, that architecture makes it very hard to stay successful. The basic principle is super simple. Again, we have the CMS backend where the preview happens, where the business users work. And the second component here, most manufacturers or vendors call that content as a service, or CaaS. That is a microservice for content. So it is an interface that can deliver content fragments to any other machine, to any other system that's asking for content fragments. So technically speaking, it's a RESTful content API. It's an industry standard for exchanging data between systems. Completely decoupled from that, there is the front-end application, and that no longer sits in this dotted box. That can be any programming language, it can be any vendor, it can be any environment, any physical hardware or any software that is fetching the content from CMS, and it can do its best to present that content to the outside world. So what we see is we have a very clear division of labor where the user experience code lives only in the front-end application, and that is developed completely independent from CMS. So it's much easier to make a change in the front end without having to touch the back end simultaneously. So if you ever get to write a test on what Headless CMS is, this is kind of the textbook definition. It's a decoupled architecture plus the REST API for exchanging data. That is what we call headless architecture, or in our case, a Headless CMS. Doing all of that with one front end, that can in itself already be beneficial, but it really becomes powerful when you look at more touch points. So right here in this diagram, you see that there's the website, there's also a mobile application or a PWA, there can be a shop, digital signage, voice assistants, or anything else. All of these can fetch content from the content as a service interface. And what is important is that all these front ends, they fetch the content based on the exact same integration approach. So if you decide to add a new touch point, which has become important within your customer's journey, you do not have to touch the backend. You don't have to create a new CMS. You essentially can tap into the same interfaces and expose that content to the new touch points. And also, you can use different technologies for each of these touch points, and you can use what works best for the touch points and have separate teams working on those. And with our customers, what we learn is that alone makes it much easier to staff projects, because you no longer need experts who have CMS know-how and touch point know-how and know how to manage a monolithic application, but you can have specialized teams working only on touch points, making updates to the user experience much faster. There's a number of other factors that drives the headless hype, and I just want to quickly mention a bunch of these. One is mobile apps. We've had them before. Some of our customers, they have even gone so far to say that my desktop website has the second priority. So it's even beyond mobile first. They say, we don't care so much about the user experience in the browser. What is important for us is that the apps works just beautifully. Like I said earlier, and headless approach works great with kind of this mobile application first approach. Progressive web apps, that is a topic that we're going to hear more of later. That is the second biggest driver of this hype. And in my eyes, it's even more important than the first one. Progressive web apps, they kind of bridge the world between web or mobile web and the app experience. It's kind of best of both worlds. It has benefits for the end users, but also has a lot of benefits for organizations who want to tap into the power of PWAs. They can save a lot of work, reduce redundancy in their code bases, and so on, and create great user experience PWA based. And we're going to hear more about that later, like I just said. Third one, that is more a technical aspect. There's a lot of ready-to-use frameworks. You might have heard some of the buzzwords that are around, like React, and Vue, or Angular. All of those are kind of libraries for programmers, shortcuts to create user experience, and many of these are just optimized for Headless CMS, and that can be a tremendous driver for a short time to market and agility. But agility, that is the killer argument. That is what I see as the focus of why Headless is so great. It is really supercharging agility, and I want to show you on one slide why I think that makes such a big difference. We've seen customer-facing front ends before. They can span from the web experience up to, let's say, packaging inserts. So that's kind of an analog artifact that you can also power from a digital experience platform or from a CMS. But what you also see, what is not so visible though, are the mission-critical backend systems. So that is where your business users work. And like I said earlier, it's typically more than one. And we, as a CMS vendor, we would love the idea of being the center of the universe. You know, everything is content and everything circles around content. But in reality, that is not how our customers operate. For them, content management is one subsystem of many. There's the shop engine, there can be the CDP, there's the product database, there can be legacy application, homegrown applications. All of those systems are equally important, and all of them need to be available, to be up and running in order to create the best experiences at the front end. So what the headless architecture now does is it puts kind of an abstraction layer between the back end and the front end. So instead of having to integrate everything with everything, there's kind of a handbook for APIs that can be leveraged from all of these backend applications. And the people designing the user experiences at the touch points, they can virtually look at that handbook and tap into the power of those APIs to create great user experiences. And that decouples creating user experiences from the backends and vice versa. So you could, for example, run a user test on the web shop, or you could update the product database, or you could create a team that has a new idea in packaging that needs content. And you can try those ideas in short iterations, in short sprints, without having to wait for a huge monolithic application being pushed through a major relaunch. So in the old world, some of our customers would only launch their front end, would only update their front end 3 or 4 times a year, because there was so much effort into developing and testing and then kind of lifting the whole monolithic block up from one major version to the next. But today, everyone wants to step away of that. People rather want to have hundreds or thousands of updates a year, and you can only reach that through decoupling backend systems and front-end touch points. That gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of when you update what, in terms of how fast you can update user experiences. And that is what I think really drives the headless hype from kind of an organizational and management perspective. I'll quickly sum up the business values of why is headless architecture so great? What is in for our customers? What's in for you? Number one, it enables content for any channel today or in the future, and it decouples backend and front-end tools technically, but also in terms of the skill set, which makes it easier to staff those projects. We see a much faster time to market for updating the user experience. We can also step away from big bang waterfall style relaunches and instead go with this microservice approach where small incremental improvements are being made. Everything is data-driven and evidence-based. And lastly, it's the perfect setup for agile organizations. That can really help you become a faster player in digital business.